might be new to for those of you who may be new to SIX, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we work in close coordination with legislators, advocacy groups, think tanks, and advocates to provide the tools and information legislators need to be successful. SIX's resources are free of charge to state legislators and to staff. The Rural Democracy Initiative supports and connects rural leaders working to transform our lives and communities. They invest in year-round civic engagement, issue advocacy, community organizing, infrastructure, and rural leadership in statewide and national coalitions. In addition to grant making, Rural Democracy Initiative also supports rural leaders and organizations through convening, research, and communications. My name is Kendra Kimbaraskis. I am the Senior Director of Agriculture and Food Systems here at SIX. And before we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about my story. I grew up on a dairy farm in a small rural community in South Central Michigan. I'm a child of the 1980s farm crisis. When the price of milk went through the floor, my parents were forced with a choice of either selling our dairy herd or losing the farm. We sold the herd, but many of our neighbors lost their farms. In real time, with the loss of many family farms, I saw our main streets and rural businesses disappear. And then NAFTA came and took a lot of our jobs away as well. I saw the destruction of not only rural communities, but rural economies. Today, my hometown, which once had 2 independent grocery stores, several restaurants, a hardware, and a pharmacy, now has $2 Generals, a Dollar Tree, and a McDonald's. This is very much the plight of many rural towns across the country. Our rural communities are not okay. Those early days were incredibly formative for me. My frustration with some in the progressive movement who discount rural people and the value that we bring brought me to SIX, where my colleagues and I work with state legislators and communities to transform what feels impossible by reimagining and building systems that work for so many. We must remember that rural people span geography, nationalities, and race, and that there are powerful opportunities to build multiracial class solidarity in our rural communities that can work for many, not only the elite few. Building shared power between state legislators and the communities most impacted by policy decision is SIX's bread and butter. That's why we organize on the ground in states and across states to build economies that center people, from breaking up corporate monopolies to ensuring the ultra wealthy pay taxes that they owe, and from sustainable agriculture to expanding healthcare access, including abortion care. We're working across the country and across movements to build states that empower working families. We are so grateful to have you all as a part of this work. And now, just for some housekeeping, today's presentation is being recorded. We will save plenty of time at the end of the presentation for your questions, so feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any point during the presentation. And we'll also send out this recording and many resources after the webinar. So I'm now going to turn it over to Bobby Clark, who is a consultant for the Rural Democracy Initiative, the project lead for the Winning Jobs Narrative team, and his colleagues David Winkler and Joshua Doss, to share their work on a narrative architecture that progressive advocates and leaders can draw from to frame a broad range of issues. Winning Jobs Narrative is focused on equipping advocates and leaders to communicate about jobs, work, and the economy in a way that resonates broadly across race and geography, builds power, and results in policy wins that benefit us all. Bobby, David, and Joshua have all played key roles in helping to develop and test the narrative across a range of issue contexts and with varying communities. They all have extensive backgrounds in public opinion research and narrative development as well. So Bobby, thank you for being here. We'll kick it over to you.
Thank you very much. And just quickly, I'll give everybody on our team just a chance to introduce yourselves too. As Kendra said, I'm actually a consultant to the Rural Democracy Initiative. It was actually in some conversations with Sarah Janes, who runs the Rural Democracy Initiative, that the idea for Winning Jobs Narratives started right after the 2020 election. And then David and Joshua were both early people to join that project. And RDI remains a strong supporter of it, but it certainly has ambition beyond just being able to communicate more effectively with rural people. And so I still serve as senior advisor And I'll quickly let David and Joshua introduce themselves, and then they're going to, I'm going to lead the presentation, but they're going to add comments as we go.
I saw that finger. I'll go first, David. I am Joshua Doss, Senior Research Manager at Hit Strategies, as Bobby said. Was a part of the original team that anchored the Winning Jobs narrative research. Of late, I've been sprinkling a lot of it into our ongoing Black voter research at Hit Strategies. So when I hop in, I'll probably just give little tidbits about things that work particularly well for Black voters, or maybe small alterations that help us effectively talk to Black working people. And I'll pass it to Dave.
Hey everyone, nice to see you. I am based in Colorado, where I'm a research consultant. I've worked in progressive politics for a couple of decades. Spent a few years working real closely with Six when it started, and actually helped run a project to kind of look at various threats that were on the radar in 2017 at the start of those sessions. So it's nice to see some familiar names in the chat, and thanks for having us.
Great. All right. So I'm going to get us started. I'm going to try to, can I get a check that you can see? Thumbs up, David? Okay. Try to get us through this in about a half an hour, so we have some time for conversation. But just quickly, as Kendra said, the aspiration of Winning Jobs narrative was finding ways to be able to communicate more effectively with very broad, to resource advocates, leaders, others, anyone communicating about policy change, and be able to talk about the things that matter most to voters, the kitchen table issues that affect their daily lives, their economic, and be able to reach people very broadly, because increasingly we have one conversation in this country. It's difficult to have multiple conversations with different communities, different parts of the country. And so we need to be able to communicate effectively very broadly across race, geography. And this has been a project. It's, our motto as we started Winning Jobs narrative was radical cooperation. Like, we never thought that we were going to figure out the answers for all of our problems for all time. We mostly wanted to, our aspiration was to lead a really, really important conversation and to contribute thinking, to learn from others, to share our learning broadly, and contribute thinking towards, what is a collective goal of being able to talk about these really, really key priority issues for voters most effectively. And as you can see here, just a sprinkling of some of the organizations and firms that we've worked with. And it really does reflect the, really broad diversity of our movements, from constituencies that we work with, but also types of issues, and also geographic. So narrative, what is narrative? That's a buzzword that's been around for a while. Really simply, narrative is it's a lever for creating change. It's a recognition that, we as human beings, we're hardwired to make story out of the inputs that we receive. And those stories that work in our minds really impact our perceptions of things, our perceptions of other people, our perceptions of issues. And so what narrative change is about is being able to talk about the things that we're advocating for, invoking these narratives that help us position the issues we're working on in a way that really resonates more broadly with people. Narrative is not a message. We talk a lot about Winning Jobs narrative as a narrative architecture. It's intended to inform messaging. The messaging we use in turn, helps tell a story. And you'll see what I mean as we start to go through this. And we need a new narrative because, the economic issues that really dominate the concerns of most voters, it is for a lot of us working to advance, climate change solutions, or, broaden access to healthcare, things like minimum wage increases. Often our policies can be popular themselves, but the way we communicate them isn't always. And so we leave support on the table by not communicating about these policies in ways that are more effective. And so, and to be able to make policy change, we have to be able to build strong, resilient majorities who really insist on the change. And I know that a lot of you within a capital, you've experienced what it's like to feel the pressure from the public outside to pass something. Well, that's what we need to be able to do. So we started this project by just trying to deeply understand voter attitudes. We looked at 2 decades of prior research. We started with a lot of qualitative, over 3,000 conversations with voters, just to hear their perspective. And there are a few key things we wanted to highlight. First of all, that the way voters think about the economy is really in very personal terms. It's how they're doing, how people like them are doing. They have a very clear sense of what they think the economy is. And when they hear you talk about the economy, that's how they're relating it, primarily is to their personal experience. Strengthening the middle class, investing in the middle class, growing the middle class, is seen generally by voters as key to economic growth. The sort of the neoliberal story that's been so dominant really since the 80s of that what drives the economy is tax cuts that primarily benefit the rich and corporations, and deregulation, that is economically generative. That thinking exists in the public, but the public is much more aligned with the idea that they are the economy, and that investing in people means investing in a stronger, growing economy. Work and contribution are really important to people. It's a little bit complicated. It's core to identity. There's some variance across demographic groups, but generally people, their own autonomy, their work is important to them in their lives, and they want to hear their leaders and others recognize that and talk about that. COVID-19 definitely shifted expectations somewhat. We certainly saw that people emerged from COVID-19 with higher expectations about work, the desire to be respected, better quality of life, time with family, all of those things. So fortunately for those who are advocating for progressive economic policies, voters are much more receptive to those post-COVID than they might have been before. And then also, we just can't say it enough, voters want their own agency to be respected and recognized. So all of that led to ultimately what is the winning jobs narrative. And I'm gonna, as Kendra said, it is, it's, the narrative is really about the fact that workers, not corporations and the wealthy, are the drivers of the economy. And then when everyday people, small businesses, family farmers have what they need, everybody prospers because the economy is us. And the policy should prioritize what working people, what families need. And as our approach to the economy, businesses will do just fine as long as we have a thriving populace. And so the specific elements: center and lead with working people. We have to be able to connect with everyday voters for them to trust us. Certainly for you all as leaders, how people perceive you is important. And so being able to demonstrate that you share broadly held values is important, and including values around work, affirming people as the engines of economic growth. We're going to talk about what this is not in a minute, but that idea that people, that everything we do from the time we wake up in the morning is economically generative, and we need to have that front and center as we make policy, is important. And then emphasizing personal agency by positioning government not in a starring role, not as government having all the answers, saving everybody, but as government equipping people, being in their corner, making sure that they have the resources they need, the tools and the opportunities to be able to build their own lives, build their own families, build their communities. And then finally, connecting the dots between policies and the broader economy and the broader population, even very targeted policies, like something like student debt relief, or some particular tax incentive you may have in your state that isn't intended to benefit everybody, but some people. The more we're able to connect that to everyone, and how that doesn't just benefit the people who directly are impacted, but it ultimately benefits certainly their families, but also their broader communities. That is a way that we can help popularize policies better. What WGN is not, it's not about exclusively centering working people to the exclusion of others, and we certainly don't want to replace any other important narratives around social justice, racial justice, a lot of the work around, climate smart solutions. It's not about replacing other narratives. It's about being complementary. It's certainly not about reducing people to their economic value alone. We want to always talk about people as their whole selves. It's not about reinforcing bootstraps narratives, that As we talk about equipping people, it's not about them having to do for themselves. It's about just reframing the supports that government can deliver in ways that feel like the agency of people remains front and center. And it's certainly not about short-term wins. It's about longer-term change. So let's go into each of these elements, and we'll show you some examples of what we mean. We'll put a little bit of context here, and this will make more sense. So centering and leading with working people, first of all, it means making them the subjects. One of the complaints that many voters have had over time about both parties is they feel as though one party might be much more for the rich and one party might be much more for the poor, and they feel like often that they aren't, no one's really looking out for them. And we make choices all the time, frankly, both parties do, that reinforce that idea unintentionally. And there are ways that we can avoid that. Identifying working people and messaging specifically, and then prioritizing the concerns of working people. Rising costs dominate the concerns overwhelmingly of most folks, and they want to hear their leaders talk about that. And so they want to hear how the policies that are being debated actually help improve their bottom line. A good example of this, of where we can get it wrong, is the child tax credit. The child tax credit was really talked about by the proponents of the child tax credit. They really focused almost exclusively on the child tax credit as an anti-poverty initiative. It will lift half of children out of poverty. That is true. It was an important anti-poverty initiative, but it was actually much more than that. And we did a test after it expired, and we showed that talking about the tax credit in equipping ways, this is about making sure that parents have what they need to be able to work and take care of their families, actually drove more support, and talking about it only as an anti-poverty initiative actually pushed people the other way. Making a connection around deeply held values. So this is a challenging one because we certainly don't want to, as progressive advocates, we don't want to be reinforcing harmful narratives around deservedness or around who works hard and who doesn't and things like that. This is more ultimately about the fact that people do work hard, and they, at the very least, they want to be respected for that. They want their leaders to recognize that they work hard and make sure that that work really amounts to something, because it should amount to something. And too many Americans feel right now that they're working harder and harder and getting further and further behind, and more is out of their reach. And they want you all as leaders focused on doing something about that. To emphasize the point, this was from another survey that we reviewed right as we were starting the project. It was a large survey, over 8,000 people surveyed nationally. And they were asked this forced choice question to really sort of surface underlying values. And they were asked, which played a greater role in getting where you are today, hard work and effort or luck and circumstance? And you can see really almost any way you look at the population, people say hard work and effort overwhelmingly. A big part of that is because we don't want to think that our own agency is unimportant. And so it's not so much about celebrating hard work. It's about the fact that our own agency is important in our lives, even though there are systemic challenges that we face. The way that this starts to look different is if you start to look at it by ideology. And so people who self-identified as very liberal in the survey were less than 50% hard work and effort. And people who were classified as progressive activists by the sum total of the responses in the survey were the polar opposite of the rest of the population. And we only show this not to say that progressive activists are wrong. I would have answered the same way, because I think all day, every day about all the things that are existent in the system. That's just not where most people are. They're not approaching it from the same place. And so if we write the importance of agency and autonomy out of the story, we're missing something that's very important to people.
Let me quickly jump in there and just make this one that people on this call have probably seen folks wear t-shirts that would say something like hardest worker in the room, or people have tattoos that say work hard, play hard. Nobody has a shirt that they wear that says middle class. Even though they aspire to be in it or might identify that way, that value of work is just, it is very common and popular, and we shouldn't be afraid to lean into it.
And I'm going to show one example of this, and then I'm going to pass it to Joshua in a second, because Joshua's been doing some work. He's done several projects where he's been building off of winning jobs narrative, including one currently. I just want to highlight this. This was an ad that was run by Building Back Together, and it was during the early debate around Build Back Better. And this was an ad where this woman, she's a restaurant owner in North Carolina. And this is a way to talk about work without, certainly it's not about celebrating work and it's not about celebrating hard work, but she simply makes the statement, employees can't work without childcare. Like being able to have childcare is one of the basic things that you need in life to be able to work and take care of yourself. And so this gets at the sentiment of, acknowledging that people's work is important without getting anywhere close to reinforcing, negative narratives. But Joshua, could you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing currently, where you've been exploring this?
Yeah, I'll be real quick. Just taking this a step further, we've been putting this core and central value of hard work in our test with Black voters. His Strategies right now is doing a really large project with the Black Economic Alliance. And not only does this, so to speak, work with Black voters, but we're learning that it's like a necessary messaging piece when we're talking about closing the racial wealth gap. So in these focus groups and in our quant, we're having like these deep-seated conversations about the cause of the racial wealth gap and the solutions to fixing it. And as Bobby was kind of saying there, as practitioners, we're very well aware that these things are caused by like large policy failures, right? And the solutions, by and large, are policy changes as well, access to housing, combating discriminatory lending and things like that. But when we offer those solutions in messages to Black voters without talking about how our hard work is a part of the story, our work in tandem with policy changes will bring about the change that we want to seek, that we seek in our communities. When we fail to put those two together, they begin to reject our solutions and our messages, right? So that's one of the biggest learnings that we got from the focus groups. I think what David said is extremely important. Folks are identifying as hardworking people. And the second thing I'll say is that folks have a communitarian relationship with hard work as well too. It's about contribution, right? That is what I contribute to society. So when we make messages that miss that, we miss like the love language of hard work that Black and brown folks have, and wrapped in it is our agency. That's how we take care of our families. So just throw that in there, Bobby. I can toss it back to you.
Awesome, thank you. And these guys they'll interject throughout. So affirming working people as the drivers of economic growth. This is so important. It's one of the single most powerful things we've seen in terms of being able to frame a broad agenda is the idea that growth, which benefits us all, and growth is something that the voters want to see. They want to hear about the way that things grow the economy. Really, they're not so much thinking about specific metrics of that. They're just thinking about abundance and more, that we get more for everyone, and what causes more for everyone, making sure that everyday people have the things that they need to be able to build a life, that they have lower costs, that they have higher incomes. Looking out for the well-being of people is seen as very generative. That's where voters really are. But if that's left unchallenged, if all they're hearing is a traditional free market message that lower taxes and deregulation, basically government out of the way, that can actually sound appealing too if it's not challenged. But if it's challenged with au contraire, we need to actually have government very actively engaged in the corner of everyday people, making sure they have what they need. As our approach to economic growth, that actually wins. And so, this is the shift. You hear President Biden in particular talks a lot about middle out economics and needing to grow the economy from the bottom up, middle out, not the top down. There are actually conservative think tanks now that are embracing the idea of people as the economy and rejecting, what had been a neoliberal view, which is that we need to have policies that prefer the capital holders, and that as long as the capital holders are doing well, then everybody else will magically benefit. And so a really important shift that is powerful framing. And this was a message we did early in the project where we gave people the opportunity to highlight things in a message that made particular particular sense to them. And so the darker you see something, the more people agreed with it. And so you could see, like, in this message, people particularly resonated with the fact that, like, things are too expensive. We need to support and recognize the work that people put in. We need to respect their contributions, and that the middle and the working class are the engines of our economy. Here's a good example of that put to work in an issue campaign. This was a minimum wage campaign in Colorado that we found the ad for. Very, very middle out in the way that this is a restaurant owner who's making the case that when workers do well, we all do well. Good, clear statement of how growth happens. And this amendment, it values work, it values workers. It's going to add all this money to the local economy. It's not just good for these workers. It's not just the fair and just thing to do. It's also the really smart thing to do for our whole community. Similarly, we can talk about labor advances. When the culinary workers in Las Vegas got a raise, that wasn't just a boost for them, it was a boost for all of Las Vegas, because that was an economic infusion in Las Vegas, because people turn around and they spend that money. Here's more union examples. When workers get ahead, that grows the economy for everybody. When workers are paid well, they can support their families and communities, benefits everybody. We've done, all of our resources are available on winningjobsnarrative.org. Anything we do, we make public. And we had a really exciting recent test where we focused on unions, union workers, and these were some messages that did really well. Kendra mentioned that I'm a consultant to Rural Democracy Initiative. We recently did a survey of rural voters. I've sprinkled in a few slides from that survey. Here's one. This was a very, the idea, the resonance of a middle out approach to the economy isn't just something that progressive people respond to. This was a survey that this was a heavily Republican sample, very rural, small towns, and you see by a pretty wide margin, these voters preferred policies that lower costs and raise incomes for working people, because hardworking Americans are the engines of the economy, as opposed to keeping taxes low for everybody and reducing burdensome regulations on businesses. Number 4, emphasizing personal agency. This is one of the, and positioning government is supporting, one of the easiest things for elected leaders to be able to, very quickly adopt and be able to do. And in short, this is all about making sure that we are keeping the agency people front and center in the story, that we're never positioning government as coming to the rescue, certainly not elected leaders as coming to the rescue. No one needs to be saved by you, but they do want you in their corner, fighting for them, making sure they have all the things that they need to be able to build their own families, to be able to build their own communities. And we tested, this is sometimes hard for some very progressive advocates to hear, that if we take the same policy, reframe it as about tools and opportunities, as opposed to using helping language, it tests much better. And that can feel difficult to hear, because there are so many advocates that really desperately want to help so many people who need help. And we just have to remember that they don't want, even as well-intended as we are, nobody wants to be rescued by us either. But they do want us fighting for them to make sure that they have the things that they need in their lives. So it's just it's a very subtle difference. And one way to do that is to talk about policies as providing people the tools and the opportunities that they need to build their own life, to build their own communities. That tools and opportunities language is really broadly extensible. We can talk about a really wide array of policies, from everything from safer communities to the freedom to decide when and how you have a family, to affordable healthcare, affordable childcare, affordable housing. All of those things we have found again and again and again are broadly perceived by people as just the basics they need in life to be able to build their own lives, and that's what they want you fighting for. Foundation is, Joshua also led an interesting project where they explored more metaphors for the role of government, and found that the more economically stressed people are, the more they really respond to, I think I'm summarizing this accurately, Joshua can correct me, the more they respond to very structural sounding metaphors like foundation, because what they are feeling is vulnerability, as though they could drown, or they could sink, and they want a stronger foundation in their lives, and they want And we can talk about so many things in the same way we talk about tools and opportunities. We can use metaphors like foundation, and metaphors matter in terms of how people perceive things. Joshua, do you want to add anything from, that was a really cool project.
I think that, no, that's, you nailed it. The only other thing I'll add that we learned from that project, and I think some other folks are testing as well, is removing barriers is another metaphor that works really well, and it's good for that posture, right? It just kind of puts government as removing barriers that frankly people feel like shouldn't have existed in the first place, right? And it allows the listener to still be autonomous and have their agency as the person that is continuing to push forward and build their own lives with those barriers out of their way. So
awesome, thank you. And here's how this can how the framing. We just talked about centering people as the engines of the economy, and we just talked about the government and the equipping role. Here's that frame put together, and we're showing you how you can use that to frame a whole bunch of different things. So, the agenda is all about working to grow the economy by raising incomes and lowering costs, so working people have the tools and opportunities they need to build a good life. We don't believe in magic words necessarily, but this is the closest thing we found to magic words in framing a very broad agenda. And you can see lots of things can follow that. So the message at the top: hardworking Americans are bringing the economy back. That's keeping working people as the heroes in the story. Creating record, but we're getting things done for them. Creating record numbers of good-paying jobs, lowering costs, fighting outsourcing, bringing supply chains home. All very popular things. Or investing in America means investing in the middle class, because when we invest in hardworking Americans, we see stronger economic growth that benefits everybody. And you could really, there's so many different kinds of policies that could really follow that broad framing on the left. And then finally, we talked about this at the beginning, connecting the dots, even for targeted policies, broadly to everyone, broadly to the economy. There's a principle in social science research called targeted universalism, that if we talk about targeted policies that don't obviously benefit everybody in only targeted benefit ways, like this is how that group of people will benefit, we don't do as well with that policy as we do if we can actually make a broader case about the policy. And here's a couple of examples. There are aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a big thing, aspects of that particularly benefited different parts of the population. Some of them benefit farmers, for example. And if we talk about this, so like the Inflation Reduction Act provides family farmers with tools to lower their costs and secure our food supply by producing more with fewer resources and preparing for extreme weather. That improves the bottom line for the farmers. It lowers costs for working families, and it's good for our climate, our air, and our water. Like, this is a beautiful message that tested really well in looking at the Inflation Reduction Act in particular. This actually tested really well broadly, not just with rural people. And it's a good example of really trying to universalize the benefits of what could otherwise be seen as a targeted policy. Immigration is another one. I've done a ton of work on immigration in the last few years. Opponents of immigration really want to use the issue to divide and conquer. They want to talk about immigration as a threat. They want to make the story all about people that we don't know who are probably queued up at the border. Or and if we talk about immigration as in two ways: one, make it part of make immigration reform, immigration work part of a broader agenda that's all about prioritizing everyday people. And then also talk about how immigrants contribute. Joshua talked about how important contribution is to people. Talking about contribution was one of the ways we create a sense of relatedness, because every people in the same group all participate in the group in some way. And so immigrants are us. There are millions of immigrants in our communities that enrich our lives and contribute to our communities in so many ways, including economically. Immigration is part of a healthy, growing economy. Of course, we need to be able to have an orderly process, but we also need a functioning one, because it's a good and healthy thing for the country ultimately.
Bobby, can I add in?
Yeah, jump in.
That makes economic sense. Those words, that makes economic sense. Not tied to any particular policy, but we've tested in a few contexts, and it's a way to just assert that what you're doing is good for everyone. So, quick one.
Yeah, and we've A/B tested that, and it actually boosts the performance of a message every single time you use it. That makes good economic sense. Good for everybody, good for the economy, makes good economic sense. That kind of language, it just shows people that you have a bigger picture in mind. You have everyone in mind. And so really good language to use. I'm going to very quickly, I want to make sure we have time to have questions, but I'll just very quickly go through some of the results of this rural survey that Rural Democracy Initiative did that really, intentionally aligned very much with the Clean Jobs narrative. And the biggest takeaway from rural voters is that what we have seen at Winning Jobs narrative is that there is so much more that unites the country than divides us in terms of attitudes of people. I know Joshua feels strongly about this from his own personal experience that he might want to speak to, is that, whether it's Black people in a suburb of a large city, or whether it's people in rural America, there's a lot that's really common that we have in terms of attitudes and our support for certain policies. And so, much has been made about the fact that rural people have been shifting to the right, perhaps in some unhelpful ways around nationalism and things like that. There's a lot that we can work with rural people as well as all communities to be able to unite a broader majority behind some key policies. One of them is certainly abortion. In this, we asked a three-part question that we gave people a chance to say that their abortion's illegal, abortion should be illegal, it's wrong, or abortion should be legal, absolutely, or I may have personal qualms about abortion, but I think it should be that's a decision people should be able to make for themselves, and government shouldn't. 77% of rural people are opposed to government imposing abortion bans. It's one of the reasons why we've seen rural people be part of winning coalitions on protecting abortion in places like Kansas and Ohio. And they, feel strongly that this is something that shouldn't be about government, it should be between a woman and her doctor. So we shouldn't dismiss rural voters as not being able to be part of broader coalitions that are in support of really important issue priorities. A big debate that is being had now, will continue to be had, is the opponents of an active role for government are now and will always say that it hurts the economy. One of the ways they're saying that now is they're saying that that's contributing to rising costs, all the spending. And in reality, there's so many ways to look at rising costs that are really much more about just the choices that some corporations are making. And we see that there's generally there's a real debate in voters' minds of which is more important, corporate greed or government spending. And so that's actually for anyone who believes in an active role for government, it's very important to engage in that debate and make sure that we don't allow the common sense to settle in the public that an active role for government is inherently bad. We also see in this poll that 81% of voters agreed that corporate monopolies now run our economy, and 81% agreed that our economy is rigged for the wealthy and the powerful. Honestly, they're not wrong. The tax cuts that were championed under the prior administration, over $1 trillion went into stock buybacks. They didn't raise anybody's salary one penny. It benefited the capital holders, and so it's not wrong, and it's a very prevalent attitude, and it's an attitude that's really transcends the population. It's really all areas, all demographics. There's strong support for policies that take on corporate greed generally. And so again, this is a very Republican sample. These are very rural people. Things like banning junk fees, certainly requiring, tax fairness, simply requiring corporations and the wealthy to pay their fair share in taxes is generally very popular, even with very, very conservative crowds. These are some other particularly rural policies that we tested. So restricting foreign ownership of farmland. Rural Democracy Initiative and State Innovation Exchange have both worked on highlighting a policy agenda that rural Americans are very supportive of. We tested some of those in this survey, and they all tested very, very favorably. requiring all meat products to be 100% born, raised, and slaughtered in the U.S. to be made in the USA. Shifting government support from corporate agribusinesses to small and independent family farms. Cracking down on meat processing monopolies and ensuring local businesses can compete. Wildly popular. Certainly investing in infrastructure, investing in broadband, supporting the rural schools program. These are all government being very active, and you can see overwhelmingly favorable by rural people. A clean air and water, are things that are certainly very popular. And investing in clean energy. And one of the things about clean energy is that we've consistently found at Winning Jobs Narrative that the more we can lean into an economic frame for clean energy, how that is, so that you see the top message here, our government should invest more in clean energy like wind and solar to lower costs, support American energy independence, and create jobs that can't be outsourced. We got a total support there, a total agree of 62. Simply talking about clean energy transition, or simply talking about global warming and climate change, we leave support on the ground. We can talk about those things. We just need to talk about those things. The more we can include a broader economic frame and the economic benefits of clean energy transition, the more we build broader majorities.
Can I just hop in here and say really quickly, Bobby, I think you touched on this. I just want to say it specifically. Even we just did a survey among battleground voters, and we had 60% of folks who said that they'd rather government get out of their way than make opportunities for them. Also turn around and say that they like the rent stabilization when we talked about rent stabilization as a power grab back from large corporations, right, that are, taking opportunities to commodify your living expenses. So I think that's basically what Bobby was saying there as well. I just want to especially with what Biden just released, a pretty topical point there.
Awesome. Thanks, Joshua. And then I think I'm going to stop now, but we can, all of this is going to be available to you in the deck that the 6 team can share. And I want to make sure we have some time now for questions, but and all of our resources are available. Everything we've ever tested, all of our research, all available for free for anybody at winningjobsnarrative.org.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We have had a couple of questions come in. And then those of you who are sticking around for Q&A, feel free to drop any questions in either the chat or the Q&A tool, and we'll get to them. First question that came in: unions create a better balance of power between economic elites and workers. Is there any way to connect rural populations to the concept that unions build the middle class and create secure economic futures?
I will say one thing, and then I'm going to ask David. I think has done a ton of pro-labor research, but we find that generally unions are popular. The idea of unions are popular, and unions are certainly experiencing a moment right now. One of the biggest ways that unions are that unionization is fought, and also pay increases and things like that, is that the opponents will attack with zero-sum thinking. This is going to cost jobs. They do the same thing with minimum wage increases, but it's going to cost the broader community for this group of people to get something more. And we found that idea of targeted universalism, the more we can relate those talk about how those policies aren't just good for the workers, how unions don't just benefit the workers themselves, unions actually benefit the broader communities too. Because when workers get ahead, everybody gets ahead. So and it's underutilized, and we find our friends in labor like that idea. There's just not a lot of evidence of outside groups talking in that way. But David, and Joshua, from your other experience, what else would you add?
Not a lot. I put in the chat a link to both our union worker memo that's on the website, and then from that memo, one of the most powerful messages is in the chat here. There was an even more successful message above that on slide 6 you can go to, that talks about putting working families, small business, and labor union workers ahead of big corporations. So the more you can kind of start narrow and go broad, the better.
Anything, Josh? Okay.
Thank you. Another question that came in is, have you done any testing to disrupt the narrative that all industry, even very damaging extractive industry, is good for rural areas because of the jobs they bring?
That's a really good question. I was just having this conversation with, the anniversaries of some of the big laws are coming up, and I was talking to Tony Pippa from Brookings Institute about the CHIPS Act, and he was talking about how semiconductor manufacturing is a huge consumer of water. So some of these big projects that are being placed in more rural communities may have a very negative environmental impact. I don't have a great answer for that. And frankly, I'm not sure that we should try to persuade people that jobs are the most important thing to the exclusion of other things. David, do you have any brilliant reaction to this question?
Well, some of the rural climate partnerships research about how to cite or how to push for clean energy in rural areas, probably we could kind of think backwards and what the other side of that coin would look like. My guess is that talking about the costs of dirty energy jobs means, worse healthcare and more pollution, and that leads to cancer, and that pollutes the water, which makes it harder to do good agriculture, right? Like, I think you kind of make some of those arguments as the problem, and the solution is we've got to do things a little differently than we did 150 years ago. And I don't have a link handy to that rural climate partnership, but it is pretty widely circulated. I know it's on the web somewhere, so I'll try to find out.
And Kendra, so what David's talking about, Rural Climate Partnership is connected to Rural Democracy Initiative as well, and they're particularly focused on working with organizations around the country around the clean energy transition and also climate smart ag and things like that. And WJN teamed up with them and is continuing to do work with them to understand attitudes in rural areas around clean energy siting, because this is a good example of why rural people are really important in big policy debate, because there will be no clean energy transition in this country without rural people being at the table and being part of the conversation, simply by virtue of the fact that most of the siting is going to be ultimately in rural places, and if rural people don't want them, they won't happen. And so we've done a lot of digging, done a lot of qualitative to understand attitudes about the impacts of the clean energy presence, and what that means, windmills and solar panels, and also thinking about how to contrast with what that mitigates in terms of the way that current consumption of energy impacts rural places. So we can make that available to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I know just in having conversations with a number of the legislators that are a part of our rural working group, that the issue particularly of solar siting on farmland is one that they're hearing a lot from their constituents, and it's definitely fairly dicey in terms of how they are feeling comfortable responding at times. So any support, I'm sure, would be welcomed on that front.
One observation that we had early on in that research is that rural people immediately start doing a cost benefit analysis. Their first thought is, what's being given up? What is being given up so that what's being given up in terms of productive farmland? What's being given up in terms of, the rural, the beauty of a rural place that people love so much, and how windmills will affect that. And so they first are thinking about the loss, and then they want to know what the benefit is going to be. They're not 100% opposed. They realize that clean energy needs to be part of the mix, and we need to be moving in this direction. They're not opposed to that inherently. They just want to understand better. And to some degree, one of the things we've seen is that there's just some lack of information that's really important for people. Like one fact that was really powerful in messaging is a single turn of a windmill, I hope I'm getting this right, can power a home for 2 weeks. People honestly just don't know how much energy actually comes from clean energy sources. And then finally, another thing that certainly matters for people is the ability to store that energy, the fact that there will be storage of it, so that when we have a cloudy day or a calm day, we're not without energy, there's energy that has been stored. And then, at least for the time being, also thinking about clean energy as additive and not 100% replacing gets people closer to where we need them to be.
Thank you for that, Bobby. This is a question that came in for Joshua. You mentioned your work around issues that cross-cut against or across rural and urban communities. I see housing as being one of those. You mentioned, rent control. In your work, what other issues have you found to be helpful in making those connections?
I think the better question is which ones have it. I think it's the beauty of this framing is that you can fit a lot into it, right? Because it's more about values than it is about the specific policies, right? It's about the values that they kind of come into looking at these issues with. So we just did some with affordable housing, rent stabilization. We've also done some with, Bobby mentioned child tax credit. I think the list pretty much goes on, and I think I believe the big takeaway here is posture, as Bobby was talking about, right? Increasing that agency that folks want to hear about, looking for opportunities. We didn't get into contrast as much, but looking for opportunities to contrast with not only what our ideals are, but what folks that are what they're looking for is antithetical to what we're doing, is putting that same message. Has been all effective with Black voters and middle class voters.
Excellent, thank you. Here's one for all of you. You mentioned abortion being an issue that actually plays really well with rural people. Are there other healthcare messages that you tested that are worth lifting up?
I think I would just really want to echo and emphasize what Joshua just said. I think it's almost anything you can think of. We have found that rural people respond very much the same way that other communities respond to, and across race, people respond very, very similarly. These themes are one of the things that is a defining idea in the populace is there's just a whole bunch of stuff you got to have to be able to build a life. You got to have healthcare, you got to have childcare, you got to have housing, affordable housing. You have to have the ability to move from place to place affordably. The idea that there's just a whole bunch of basics that must exist and must be accessible to you. That's not unique to any community. That is everyone. And what we have found is that universally, communities, whether they're rural, white people or more urban Black people, want their government actively involved in making sure you have those things, and are very happy for rich people and corporations to pay more taxes to make that possible. That is widely popular. So, there are certainly unique challenges for rural people. Kendra, has done so much work on, some of the specific policies around healthcare. Certainly like just being able, like living in a county where there's not a dentist is, not something that other people experience. It's something rural people experience. But, it's the framing, I think, is generally the same. Like, you need to have accessible, affordable healthcare. Everybody does. And our government should play a role in making sure that happens. It's not, and even spending. We found Joshua led some beautiful focus groups that we did during Build Back Better, and we tried to trigger people. We had these groups across race who were not partisans, and we really tried to trigger them around spending, because we knew that's a trigger point for people. And so we asked them a question: what if we spent $1 trillion? And we deliberately used a huge number on all of these, making all these things possible: more affordable childcare, more affordable healthcare. I mean, these groups of people who'd been were very sensitive about government spending. When it came to that list, when we told them about like, here's what it would be about all the basic things you need in life, wildly popular. And one Latina in a group of Latinas said, she described all of that, $1 trillion in government spending, as the foundation for self-reliance. That was an exact quote. Another woman said, those are the tools that help people work, because that's what people want. They want to build their own lives. They want to build their own communities. They don't need to be rescued, but they do realize that everything's too hard, and their government should be in their corner, making sure those things aren't so hard.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we will give you the last word there. Fantastic conversation. Bobby, Joshua, David, thank you so much for sharing all of this critical information. For folks who want to learn more, the Winning Jobs Narrative is available online. It was shared at the top of the conversation, but I'll drop it in the chat again. You can find information here. And also, I wanted to invite folks to check out the Rural Democracy poll, and somebody can grab that and drop it in the chat. Michael, I see you're on. That would be really wonderful for folks for more information. And if you are new to SIX and new to CROP, we have a cohort for Rural Opportunity and Prosperity, or the CROP. We'd love to have you join if you are a state legislator, and you can read more about it and sign up here. And then lastly, I'll drop this in the link. Thank you for doing that, Emmy. And lastly, I want to invite folks to check out SIX's national conference that's happening in Atlanta, Georgia, from December 11th through the 13th. Early registration is available through the end of the month. We'd love to have you there. And Emmy, do you want to go ahead and drop that link to register in the chat? That would be wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you again to our speakers, and we'll see you next time.